Hi, I'm George Maestri, and today we're going to take a look at two common woodworking joints, and hopefully these will give you some more modeling tools for you to use. Now, specifically, we're going to create a tongue and groove joint and then a dovetail joint. Now, these are very similar joints, but I'm going to use two separate techniques just to give you two different ways of creating these types of joints. So we're going to start off with this object here. And I've already grouped these into components. So each one is a separate component. And so I'm going to go ahead and just model each individually. Now I'm going to start off with the tongue and groove joint. So this object here will have the tongue, and this one here will have the groove. So first thing I want to do is make sure that I have guidelines in which to work. So I'm going to go ahead and select this lower object here and select my tape measure tool. And then I'm just going to left click and drag until it's at a 1/2 inch. And it should snap to that. If not, you can certainly type that in. Now for this object here, I also need some guidelines for the inner edges or the outer edges of the groove. And they're going to be inset from this just a little bit. So I'm going to use 3/16 as my measurement. So I'm going to go ahead and left click here and snap in until it hits 3/16, or you can type it in and do the same on the other side. So now what I've done is I've basically created a place here where we can actually draw our groove and then use that to create the tongue. So I'm going to select the lower object here, double click on it to open it up. Now remember, it's a component. And then all we have to do is just snap to this intersection and draw a rectangle. So I'm drawing a rectangle right here. And when we do, we get this rectangle on this face. Now, in order to create the groove, all I have to do is use my push-pull tool and push that all the way back until I get that little red warning sign. And when I do, look what happens. I get a groove all the way through. And all I have to do now is click off of that, and I've got that groove. Now we can do almost the exact same thing to get the tongue. So I'm going to double click on this upper board here, and I'm going to do almost the exact same thing. I'm going to select my rectangle tool, and this time I'm going to draw it to snap to the points. Now what happens with this is that it actually is snapping to this object here. And if I zoom out a little bit and maybe move this up, we can see what we've created here. So I'm going to just move this directly up in blue, and I'm just holding down the up arrow key to snap to blue. And what we've done is we've basically created the front face of that tongue. So if I double click on this, select that face, and then push it all the way to the end. Now this is 24 inches long, so I can just type in 24. So now I've gone ahead and created that groove. Now if we want to, we can now align the two. So I'm going to go ahead and click off of this and then select move and snap that into place. So now I've got a wonderful little tongue and groove joint. Very easy to create. Now let's go ahead and do something a little more sophisticated, and let's do a dovetail joint. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and erase all of these guidelines so that they don't get in the way of what I'm going to do next. And then I'm going over to this second set of boards. So again, we need a depth for that dovetail, and I'm going to draw a very similar guideline here. So I'm going to go ahead and draw this one up 1/2 inch. And then for the dovetail, we actually need a couple of different guidelines on the vertical side. So I need to bring this in a certain amount for the outside edge of this. Now remember, this is going to kind of come out like this and around. So this time we're going to be working in 1/8 of an inch. So I'm going to go ahead and bring this in 1/8 of an inch. So I'm just going to type 1/8, hit enter. Do the same here for 1/8, and it should snap. And then I'm going to bring this in again another 1/8 on either side. Now it should snap, but if it doesn't, you can always type it in. So what I've got is I've got two sets of guidelines now that we can use for the dovetail. So the dovetail, we're again going to start with the lower board. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on that, open up the component, and I'm going to draw a line this time. So I'm going to draw from here, snap here, 2, 3. Now that should be a reasonably accurate dovetail. Now again, just like with the groove, I can use my push-pull tool to push that all the way back. And again, you can see we've got a nice little hole. Now I'm going to show you the second technique for creating the other surface. And in this case, we're actually going to use this surface here to create the other surface. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on my component for my lower board. And then I'm going to select these inside faces. So I've selected all of the faces that represent the dovetail. And then I'm going to go Edit, Copy. And what that does is it copies those faces. Now I'm going to click out of the component and then open up this second component, and I'm just going to go Edit, Paste in Place, and it will paste it exactly where it was before. And because we have these lined up, watch what happens. Those new faces are now pasted exactly into the same place, but they're pasted into this second component. Now, we really can't see it here, so again, I'm going to go ahead and move this object up so we can. So I'm going to select this second board, and I'm just going to move it directly up. And you can see what has happened now. We have basically the dovetail, which we copied and pasted, is now part of this second component. So if I double click to open up this component, you see that all we really have to do is close this off. So I can just simply take my line tool and draw over the front face of that, and you can see how that closes that up. We do the same on the other side. So I can snap to that, closes it up. And then we've got these two faces which are reversed. So I'm going to go ahead and select that face, right-click over it, and do a reverse face, which turns it into the white color. Same thing for this face, reverse face. And now I've got my dovetail. So I'm going to go ahead and use my eraser tool to get rid of all of these. So I have to double click into the component, and I'm going to go ahead and remove these guidelines, double click into this component. Oh, that wasn't in the component. So I'm going to go ahead and just remove these. And once we have these removed, all I have to do now is select this object, move it, and snap that joint together. So there we go. So now, as you can see, we've got two separate methods for creating these types of joints. One is to simply draw it and then draw it again. The second is to draw it and then just copy the faces over to the second component. So hopefully this method will help you to draw these types of woodworking joints.